Welcome everyone to Bedtime Mysteries with Andreajohnsonbooks. I'm Andrea Johnson, your host for this evening, and the purpose of this nightly interlude is to help my audience go to bed with a simple thought. Who is it? My short bedtime stories will leave you with many questions. You will always end the evening with something to ponder or decipher. Tonight, we continue with part 6 of the Malignia, an unidentifiable person that has taken it upon themselves to act out in vengeance against those that have harmed someone. Last we left off, we found out how the 3 captive men were connected and why the shadow wanted them. They all had part in something that never should have happened. They were very, very bad men. Now, we find ourselves at the conclusion of our story, the final chapter, and the fate of our 3 imprisoned victims.
The men stared, understanding, but still not quite believing what they saw. The question was there, on each of their faces, wondering how it was all possible. But they didn't have long to wait for the answer. The shadow had removed its hood, and the moonlight shone upon an emotionless face, a face that had once held innocence, but was now simply nothing. The young girl that Mark Wallace had used stared back at the 3 men, her small body still as a statue, watching them, her eyes moving to each one. Mark sneered in disbelief and uttered the first thing that came to his mind. How? The young girl did not answer. Instead, with very slow movements, she raised her arms and made a small gesture with her fingers. Suddenly, out of the corner of the room, 2 more figures cloaked in black came forward. At least 2 of the men stared in mind-numbing shock as the other captors removed their hoods as well. Detective Bowman's throat convulsed as he stared at the girl's mother, the one he had dragged and taken while her daughter was abused. But Xavier Harris slumped his shoulders as he stared at the other figure in black, the one he had surrendered his gun to, his wife. Mrs. Harris approached Xavier slowly, a look of condemnation in her eyes. She looked directly at him as she answered Mark's question. We call it the Malignia, a new drug that creates hallucinations in the mind, causing your weakness to come to life. It controls you, mind, body, and soul. She motioned to her accomplices. We are all a part of the shadow, but we are not the ones who will be making you pay for your sins tonight. For the first time, the young girl, the one who lifted her finger and pointed to a table in the corner, spoke up. Her voice was soft as a feather. You are going to kill yourselves. Detective Bowman, Mark, and Xavier all looked at each other in confusion until the strangest thing happened. The other 3 prisoners suddenly removed their own chains and came forward in the light. They could be seen clearly now, exact and completely identical replicas of each of them. Mark Wallace, Xavier Harris, and Detective Bowman all stared in rising horror at their own reflections, shadows of their own darkness. One by one, the men were overtaken and dragged to the table by their own self. Their screams soon became incoherent as the machines and tools came to life. The shadow left the remains, leaving the dark room and closing the door, knowing that while dawn arrived as it intended, all evidence of its vindication would finally be revealed.
I hope you enjoyed tonight's segment of Bedtime Mysteries with Andreajohnsonbooks and the conclusion of the Malignia. I know it left you with many questions. How did Mrs. Harris, the young girl, and the girl's mother overcome all three men? What were the men's mistakes? Have you finally figured it out? Let's go over it together.
In part 1, Mark Wallace made a fatal mistake that allowed the young girl to use the Malignia on him. A simple small detail. He forgot to lock his door. The young girl slipped in, placed the Malignia in his drink, and was able to make him do her bidding without fight or struggle. In part 2, Detective Bowman received a phone call, but when he reached for his gun, he made a fatal mistake that cost him. He'd forgotten to put bullets in the gun. The mother had placed the drug as a liquid onto the gun and was able to subdue the detective within moments. In part 3, Xavier Harris surrendered by lowering his gun. He saw it was his own wife that stood before him, and he knew it was over, that she'd known everything. You see, Mrs. Harris was never asleep in the room. She'd been waiting for him. The smoke from his cigar held the effects of the drug, and he soon became powerless to its control.
So there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. 3 men subdued by their own shadows, overtaken and outsmarted by the 3 women they had used. They created a drug only women can manipulate and control. Hopefully, the men in the city will think twice before ever daring to harm a female again, at least not before inevitably harming themselves. Tune in next week for a new story and a new mysterious twist. Bedtime Mysteries can be seen now on Monday nights at 8 o'clock Central Standard Time. Please like my page on Facebook at Andreajohnsonbooks. You can also follow me on Twitter at AuthorJohnson78 and also on Instagram at Andrea the Creative Author. You can also visit my website at Andreajohnsonbooks.com. I wish you a good night, sleep tight, and don't leave your windows open tonight.